With Thelonious Monk playing Blue Monk in the background, I am joined by Brother Scott, and we are comfortably zoned from the 420 studios in Alameda, California. Welcome back to these airways, Brother Scott.
Hey, happy to be here.
All right, we have a great topic of discussion. You and I just last week went to see Major Barbara on play on ACT in San Francisco, and it was terrific. Thank you very much for having me as a guest.
It was fun bringing you. I'm glad you appreciated it.
Yeah, we're both Shavians, and what does being a Shavian mean to you, Scott? And I'm going to give you the mic and let you elaborate on the great George Bernard Shaw.
Thanks. Being a Shavian to me means two things, and they're not identical. One is being a Shavian in the theatrical sense, and that's the sense in which I like George Bernard Shaw very much. The content of his plays, the dialogue, their central thrust, the way he draws roles for women especially, which was very progressive, not only for his time, but even in these times. And so that's the theatrical side of Shaw. There's also a sense that's been described as Shaw's view of the world politically or philosophically. Somebody, I forget who, once said that George Bernard Shaw describes the world with precision and accuracy as though he had bent over and looked at it between his knees. And there's some trick of logic. It's not really a trick, it's a technique called the Shavian inversion, where you take a given situation and more or less turn it on its head and look at it really, essentially, from another angle. Just view the same set of circumstances or principles from a different perspective and see how it lines up. And since he's very astute at doing this, he's become famous for it. I hope that answers your question.
It does answer my question. And how do you relate that to Major Barbara, the play that we just saw on Saturday?
Well, for your listeners who might not be acquainted with Shaw, let me start with this. If you ever saw the movie My Fair Lady, that was derived from a play by George Bernard Shaw called Pygmalion. Now, Pygmalion was made into a movie in England and given the same title. And it's brought forward, its storyline is an ancient Greek myth brought forward to Victorian times in England. Pygmalion was a sculptor in ancient Greece, according to the legends, and he sculpted a female figure once, and it was so perfect as a finished product that he actually fell in love with it. He adored it. And he wished that the statue could come to life. And I suppose he prayed to Athena or some Greek goddess of some sort, and his wish was granted. And the statue came to life. And it embodied all the perfect qualities that its creator had envisioned for it. It was gorgeous, it was intelligent, it was witty. It was everything somebody might wish for in a companion. But be careful what you wish for. His wish was granted, and when the statue came to life, it found itself less attracted to Pygmalion than Pygmalion was attracted to her. And at the end of the story, the statue, I think, runs off with somebody else. She does not end up living happily ever after with her creator. She outgrows her own creator. In the movie My Fair Lady, which featured Audrey Hepburn and Rex Harrison in the starring roles.
Right.
Rex Harrison plays Professor Higgins, substituting for Pygmalion, the ancient Greek sculpture. And rather than sculpting literally a statue out of stone, he tries to sculpt a personality and an intellect out of Eliza Doolittle, the character played by Audrey Hepburn, and raise her from the gutter, quote unquote, where she's a flower girl with a thick Cockney accent and hardly any education, and cultivate her into a lady of refinement and pass her off as such at a highfalutin banquet somewhere in London with royalty and other esteemed people in attendance. And in the end, Eliza Doolittle grows into the role after rigorous training and after Rex Harrison in the character of Professor Higgins, a professor of linguistics, drills it into her how to speak and act like a lady. She pulls off the charade. And then, contrary to the wishes of many people who saw the movie but hadn't read the play, she does not end up getting together with the Rex Harrison character of Professor Higgins. She ends up running off with some other guy, opening a flower shop. At any rate, that was probably his most famous play in America because it was made into that movie. And in many of his other plays, similarly, he drew very strong female characters. And they didn't necessarily fit the traditional female role that was often assigned to female characters in Victorian times. They were very progressive for their time, and very strong women, and very admirable women. He was once asked, why do you draw your women the way you do? Why do you create them in the manner you do, and how do you do it? And he responded that he did it by creating them as if they were men, and giving them the same dialogue and same thought processes and everything as men would have. With a few exceptions, but generally speaking, that's what he did. And when someone said, why would you do that? Women and men are so different. Today we hear people say women are from Venus and men are from Mars, but Shaw disputed that. He said those are the superficialities. In reality, men and women are very much alike in almost all particulars except for a very few, and those few differences are only important on very special occasions. So that was one of the secrets of his success in writing plays.
What would Shaw say to today's times? How would he react to things being what they are in 2014?
That's hard to say. I do remember once seeing one of his last interviews. He was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1856, emigrated to London as a young man, and remained there most of the rest of his life. And although he bequeathed a sizable portion of his estate to a university in Dublin, or a museum in Dublin, I forget which, he remained in England for most of his life. And in this interview that I remember seeing, he died in 1950, so the interview was in the late 40s, I believe. He was probably 90 years old or thereabouts, because he was 94 when he died. He laments the fact that he's been trying to wake us up and point inconsistencies out to us in society and injustices and point the way forward in his mind. And we haven't been paying close enough attention.
He said that.
Was what he said.
Okay. Right. Thank you. This gives us a great insight to not only Shaw's characters, but how he developed his characters. And
can I say one other thing?
Sure.
He was known as a Fabian. He had joined the Fabian Society in London after he moved there, and the Fabians were named after a Roman general named Fabius, who was nicknamed the Delayer. Fabius was assigned the task of confronting Hannibal, who had invaded the Italian peninsula from the city of Carthage and was stomping up and down the Italian peninsula for 15 years, swatting away Roman armies like flies. and making the Romans very much afraid of what he might ultimately do. He actually marched right up to the gates of Rome at some point. But Fabius, who was sent out to meet him, was reluctant to confront him in head-to-head combat because Hannibal was so clever and so skilled. But Fabius employed a tactic of feinting, delaying, pretending to attack but withdrawing at the last minute, and always keeping himself between Hannibal and Rome. It actually proved to be a successful tactic because nearly all the Roman generals who confronted Hannibal on the Italian peninsula went down to defeat. Fabius did not, overall, but he was successful in keeping Hannibal away from Rome. Now, the Fabian society in England adopted what they considered to be the delaying tactics of Fabius in their approach to politics. They were a socialist society mainly made up of intellectuals. H.G. Wells, the noted author, science fiction author of that era, was another Fabian. And there were other notables as well that might not be familiar to American audiences. And their strategy for trying to bring about socialism in England was not to erect barricades and overthrow the system in a civil war, as was done in Russia and other places. Their tactic was to permeate the system little by little and get themselves elected to municipal offices and things like that. And Bernard Shaw actually did get himself elected to the district of St. Pancras, I believe it was called, a borough in London, and administered the day-to-day affairs of that portion of the municipality. So he had a political point in his plays. I take issue with the Fabian politics pretty much because they were largely ineffectual in the end. But Shaw was a fervent socialist all of his adult life, and his plays are permeated, if you will, with that kind of message. Even the play Major Barbara, which likes to point out the futility of our common notions of charity and charitable giving. He adopted that kind of message and inserted it into his plays. And if you watch or read Major Barbara, you'll see that. The Shavian inversion there, however, is that most of the socialist messages in the play, not all of them, but most of them, come from the mouth of another main protagonist, Andrew Undershaft, who is a major capitalist armaments manufacturer. So it's sort of an anomaly and ironic to hear Andrew Undershaft in the play Major Barbara spouting these politics, which
to his daughter, basically.
To his daughter, who runs a Salvation Army outpost on the poor side of town, and wants people to give to charity. Undershaft educates her in the futility of this by showing her the company town he has built, where all the people that work for him are well-fed, well-employed, highly paid, etc., etc., and says, Barbara, it's a cheap trick to convert people to your Salvation Army Christianity when they have an empty stomach and you dangle bread and treacle in front of them. Those are cheap conversions. Come to my town and let me show you how to really convert people. And then you get a tour of the company town and see how the quality of life of the people there. And he says once their stomachs are full and their minds have been educated, that's when they can be talked to, and that's when they can pursue intellectual ideas. Until then, they're going to have to just worry about getting the next meal.
Beautiful. Hey, thank you, Brother Scott. Always a pleasure to have you on these airways.
Thanks for having me again, Zig.
All right, and I'm going to end by saying what I generally say at the end of a broadcast. Keep your humor dry, keep your dreams wet, keep your kids out of recruiting stations, military recruiting stations. Don't let them be fodder for rich people's war, imperialistic wars that are going on that only invite problems. You join the service, You go overseas, you fight for a cause that really isn't a cause, you come back a different person. It's not good. And most of all, keep your kids off the laps of clerics wearing dresses. It's not good. Not good for the whole family. Thank you, Scott, for being here. We'll do it again real soon. Adios, amigos and amigas.